Okay, hi everybody. I'm just gonna walk us through here a little lecture that introduces a lot of the key concepts to art fundamentals that you need to be aware of to do well in art classes and design classes and I don't know, in my opinion, to do well in life. Um, the lecture I'm going to do right now for you is this Art Fundamentals lecture. You can see that it's in basically the first module here after your syllabus contract. Go ahead and click on the PDF and it should open. If you have any problems, let me know. Go ahead and expand that for us. So during our first meeting, I sort of mentioned that one of my key beliefs about drawing is that drawing is language, and every language has vocabulary. And for many people in a 100 level class, if it was a 100 level um, Spanish class, for instance, you know, you are going to be presented with information that deals with vocabulary, that deals with the alphabet, that deals with basic grammar and sentence structure. And maybe by the end of the quarter, you're able to have a conversation in Spanish. Maybe you can write a paragraph in Spanish. Um, but it's probably not until, Spanish 2 or Spanish 3 that you'd be able to do something like sit down and watch a movie in Spanish and have a dialogue with your friend in Spanish about the movie that you're watching. And so the point here being every new language that you learn, whether that's Spanish or English or Japanese or French, begins with learning foundational vocabulary and the alphabet and basic grammar. And the art fundamentals are really kind of both introduction of vocabulary and also an introduction of sort of grammar in the sense of structure. Um, I believe in the Oxford comma. I know that this isn't something that everyone believes in anymore, but I think it's very, very helpful. And there are definitely uh, things that when I was in school, as someone that's dyslexic, perhaps maybe that exasperated it. But when I was younger, there are definitely things about like grammar and vocabulary um, that I learned wrong. And then I had to unlearn it to learn it correctly. And, I've sort of explained already to you that I'm very open about my like learning experiences because I think it's really helpful for students to hear like this person is their professor and they also are somebody that struggled with some of these issues. So in addition to my dyslexia, I also had to spend a long time in my youth in speech therapy. And so learning, if we think about one way that we learn to spell words, for instance, is through hearing words and sort of like breaking them down into their, basic structure. that can be very helpful. But if you also have a speech impediment, then that's kind of like also not, it's not going to really help you. And so the reason I'm talking about this is because, like, for me, it took me a long time to learn language. My dad, my father, never finished high school. He went to sea at 16, and he, at the end of his life, had traveled all over the world and could speak like 5 languages. His job today wouldn't actually exist because what he would do would he would get on a plane and he would fly to like Germany and he would pick up a contract and then he would fly to Colombia. And on the flight, he would translate the contract from German into Spanish. And then he would present that contract in Colombia and they would sign it and they would give their terms and he would translate those to German and he would fly back to Germany and present the contract. And today we would just do that with a PDF. But for my father, that was like his bread and butter. So he spoke multiple languages. My brother's a diplomat and he gets paid more money every language he learns. And so my brother currently, him and his family are about to go to Saudi Arabia. And so like currently he's studying, I'm so sorry if I get this wrong, but currently I believe he's studying Farsi, or in the past he has studied Farsi. So maybe I'm just getting a bit confused there. But um, every time he learns a language, it moves him up in terms of skill level within the State Department. So he speaks Ukrainian, he speaks Spanish, he speaks French. He studied Farsi for when he was in Iraq, and now he's studying, I suppose, Farsi or Arabic for Saudi Arabia. And please forgive me that I don't remember the exact language. It's all just way too smart for me. But I have no capacity for languages that are spoken. I could speak a little bit of Spanish, and I know some French from art history, but really I do not have the capacity to learn languages the way that my father and my brother did. And so if we look at drawing like a language, um, like right now on my Duolingo, I can get through my daily routine on Duolingo for Spanish. But if you plop me down in front of a Spanish speaker, I'm gonna get lost in the conversation. And so everybody is at different levels and everyone has different capacities for learning. And I think that's a really important point of view to bring to learning drawing is that as a language, it's going to challenge people differently depending on what applications you use in terms of how you apply that language and how often you apply that language. So let's look at language. Let's look at some of the basic language that we need to understand for drawing. A lot of drawing is design. Or we could say a lot of design is drawing. Uh, Design is, as a subject, design has different applications from drawing. But to draw well, you have to use the design principles to make good drawings. So if you've taken design with me, um, which some of you have, we talked about the Gestalt principles and how we see groups versus individuals and how we build relationships in interpreting the world through visual stimulation and visual observation. And in my contour lecture for you, I cover the Gestalt principles because they're really important to how we draw. In addition to the relationship between drawing and design, exploring the Gestalt principles, there's also this relationship of exploring other types of design principles. So our design principles are form, line, shape, value, texture, color, space, content, and style. And so when we look at the self-portrait from Frida Kahlo, we can see this drawing that is quite complex in its composition. It's quite complex in the language that it's using in terms of like the textures. It's quite complex in terms of utilizing something like the form of a nose. And it's also complex in the sense of like content and style. What is the content of this drawing? How does it exist within the history of drawing? And is the content merely the fact it's drawing, or is the content also who Frida Kahlo is? And content, that is part of understanding context. And so if we look at the context in 2025 of this drawing versus the context of this drawing in 1946, you're going to have two very different relationships with the drawing. Context is reliant on social conversations and the way that those conversations occur within specific time and social moments. So when we look at Frida Kahlo today, if I was doing this lecture in class, I'd say, raise your hand if you know who Frida Kahlo is. And a lot of you would raise your hand. A lot of you would say, I know who Frida Kahlo is. I've seen a movie on Frida Kahlo. We studied Frida Kahlo in elementary school. Frida Kahlo is one of the most important female artists of the 20th century. If you're interested in gender and sexuality, you might say like, oh, Frida Kahlo is somebody who I studied in my gender and sexuality class because we talked about the fact that her father would often dress her in suits, and that she had this unibrow and wasn't very gender conforming, and sort of we would examine it through sort of a gendered and gender theory space. If you were studying Frida Kahlo in 1946, for the most part, you were not studying Frida Kahlo in 1946. Who you were studying was Diego Rivera, who was her husband. And you would be deeply embedded in learning about Diego Rivera, the socialist murals that he created for Henry Ford in Detroit, the Workers' Progress Administration, the WPA, and its relationship to the utilization of public funds to decorate buildings. And so Frida Kahlo in newspaper articles about that time is often simply mentioned as Diego Rivera's wife who paints too. So there's a context, right, that changes the content of the work. And that's really important to think about when we're looking at art. And I am here to teach you drawing, but also like as a former art history professor and someone who studies a lot of art history, I'm also going to give you a lot of art history because I think to understand culture, you have to also understand art. So here we see this drawing. Oh, and I just want to touch one last thing, which is very interesting to me, which is, her husband, Diego Rivera, is a socialist painter who was brought from Mexico to paint murals in Detroit for Henry Ford, who is an industrialist capitalist. And Henry Ford was also um, a Nazi. and we don't really talk about these connections, but from an art historical point of view, you know, Adolf Hitler paid to have Henry Ford's book published in German. It was one of his favorite books, and he would use it all the time in his speeches. So think about this like wild connection there, right? You have this literal, like actual literal Nazi who is paying a socialist, and Henry Ford is a capitalist industrialist, paying a socialist to come from Mexico to paint murals about his workers. And you don't know hardly any of that history at all, but probably you know who his wife is today because no one really likes Diego Rivera very much today. So when you look at a work of art, I want you to recognize and think about how it exists in this moment of time within this place in history. And so when we look at this drawing of her, we see this drawing of her and we see all these design principles. We see form. We see the utilization of line, like in her hair. We see the utilization of shape, like in the brooch, or the indication of the shape of the bird in her eyebrows. We see the utilization of darkness and lightness in value. So what is dark and what is light? We see the utilization of texture in her hair in this sort of blouse she's wearing in this background. The color of the paper and the color of the graphite, even though this drawing is monotone, that is still part of this work. We see space in terms of what is in front, what is in the back. So her hair is in the front of her face. The banner is behind her head, we kind of feel. But those flowers in the top corner kind of feel like they're sharing the space with her hair. But the hand earring is definitely in front of the braid. So where is the foreground, meaning the stuff in the front? Where is the middle ground, the stuff in the middle? And where is the background, meaning the stuff in the back? And then what style are we talking about here? You know, so Frida Kahlo was a surrealist. So is this executed in a surrealist style? Kind of, very much so. Surrealism being like almost like a dreamlike experience at times. So the bird, the banner, and then even the way that like we can look at this and say, well, one side of her hair is down, the other side of her hair is braided. Like, what is the information she's providing us there? And then take all of that information and then say, no, people talked about her in 1946 as the wife of this person, and she kind of also painted. But again, most of you don't even know who her husband was, whereas in her lifetime, her husband was more important historically than she was. And that's part of understanding art. So there are three basic components of a finished work of art: the subject, the content, and the form. So the three basic components of a finished work of art. And I want to kind of recognize with you that in the drawing one class, you're not going to make many finished drawings. The really only reason they're going to be finished is because I'm going to give you a deadline. I often like will have a drawing or a painting that I think is finished and I'll put it away, and then a year later I'll pull it out and I'll be like, oh, I want to change that, and I'll change it. So, this is subjective. So one of the components is the subject. So In a drawing like what we just saw from Frida Kahlo, the subject is Frida Kahlo. Um, and that is a representational subject, even though it's a surrealist representation of reality, it's still the subject. In a work of art where there's absolutely no information, it's just about material and mark and color, then the subject is the basic signs that the artist employed. So what kind of paint did they use? What kind of paintbrush did they use? How did they use it on the surface? What is happening with the substrate, which is like the thing that the art is made on? If it's a piece of paper, is it torn? Is it burnt? Is it pristine? So non-objective art, y'all, has to be distinguished from abstract art. In abstract art, there's still usually a subject. In non-objective art, the actual materials, or even the space in which an object is placed, or even the lack of an object, or the lack of a work of art, becomes the subject. So, abstraction, these are very different things, and it's important to recognize that abstraction has a subject. It comes from nature, usually in some way, and then it's been changed to look different. So, there is a difference between abstraction and non-objective art. So, the content of a work is basically the significance, the meaning, that is part of the work. It's sensory, it's subjective, it's psychological, it can be emotional. And it is opposed to our perceptions of its descriptive, oh, sorry, pardon me, as opposed to our perceptions of its descriptive aspect alone. So what I mean by that is like I can show you a painting um, and tell you what the painting is about, and you have like one reaction. Or I can show you a painting and tell you about the painter and how perhaps, say, they were abused, or that they weren't a good person, or they were never paid for the work of art, or it can add additional layers to the story, and the information I provide you can affect your perception of the work. How we create content, again, also relates to social context. So when I used to teach art history, there was the way that the art history books were set up were very dispersed by Western and non-Western. And so we had, for instance, European modern art, and we had, for instance, African art from Sub-Sahara that was modern. And they were often incorporated in completely different chapters, even though they happened at the same exact time. And so it's very difficult to understand how those things are significant in connection to one another because they're being taught in such a way that they are seen as being very separate. So now a lot of contemporary art history books will sometimes, I guess, I have to say sometimes, good art history books, perhaps we should say, will present a work from Italy and a work from the Congo and a work from um, Canada and a work from Japan to explore one single concept and say you can see the same concepts throughout all of these works. And all of these works have the same sort of things happening in them. Let's explore how they're similar And also let's explore how they're different. And so you're taught how to contextualize work. That's a really important thing because one of the things that you bring with you when you look at a work of art is your education. So I grew up going to famous art museums in London. I was born in Lewisham, which is a suburb basically of London. And so I grew up going to the Tate Art Museum. And my parents liked certain artists. My father liked John Williams Turner because my father was a sailor. He went to sea at 15. He spent his whole life on the water when he wasn't in airplanes. Um, so my dad connected with Turner because Turner painted seascapes. My mom really, really liked Auguste Rodin because my mom really liked sculpture. And so I was sort of raised on these types of artists, these two different types of artists. And they're both romantic artists, basically. They're both European artists. And so from a very young age, I was in sort of like imposed with these points of view, that European art was a special type of thing, right? And so that was literally something I had to unlearn. And I unlearned that through a lot of self-education and through a lot of work. And the reason that that is so important is because when I walk up to a work of art, I'm trying to think about it not based on a singular Western aesthetic value, but based on a larger global context. So we have the subject, and then we have the content of a work of art. And again, the content can change based on your experiences with art or your experience of learning who it is that you're looking at. So then finally, we have form, which is the organization or inventive arrangement of all the visual elements to create unity in an artwork. So here we're talking about like the total appearance or organization of a work of art. So form may be uh, built with an 18 by 24 canvas, or form might be something you experience as you walk through an entire gallery. Form might be something you experience when you go to a sculpture park, like the Seattle Art Museum Sculpture Park, and you walk through the sculpture park and you interact with, say, the large Richard Serra sculpture there, which is these huge, massive, massive structures made from rusted metal. It's not just about how they work together, it's also how they work within the space in which they are installed. And the space that they're installed was designed for these structures. And so the one thing is imposing its utilization or its need for unity um, in one direction. So like landscape on sculpture. And then sculpture is also imposing its unity, its need for unity onto the landscape. So there's like a back and forth. So when we're talking about form and drawing, we're typically talking about the distribution and arrangement of visual elements on a piece of paper of a certain size. But drawings could also be made in the sky. You could make a drawing in the sky with a plane. And so then the form is something which is developed through time as well as space. And so the materials that we're choosing affect the way that we are thinking about organization. So here is a drawing by the artist Cecily Brown. Oh, excuse me. She's a British artist, very, very wonderful artist. And let me see if I can just zoom in a little bit so that we can see it a little bit better. It's not going to let me zoom in, I'm afraid. Um, yeah, I think that function is only available when it's not in full zoom mode. Oh, maybe. Well, there we go. So here we can see this drawing, right? And we have all these different elements that are dispersed across this space. And when we look at these different elements, it's important to kind of consider like how are they arranged and like what is their relationship to space versus what is their relationship to one another. And so form is created through utilization of 7 principles of organization: harmony, variety, balance, proportion, dominance, movement, and economy. So when we look at this, right, we can say, okay, so like we have all this different variety of line types. We have different colors. We have different sizes. We have dominance. Like often I like to ask students what the most dominant thing is. And some person will say one thing, and another person will say another thing. And so dominance becomes a reaction to a personal way of organizing information. So, like, is this Dobin and Pincher here or horse? Is that dominant? Or is the dominant part here like these dogs because they're the most opaque part of the drawing? And so when we're looking here, right, like we're thinking about what's standing out and what is disappearing. So how is proportion affecting this? So we see here that we have different types of animals. They're in different types of proportions. And so is the proportion of the animals affecting what's dominant and what's not dominant? Obviously, we have a huge variety of things, but we also have harmony, where even though things are different sizes and different colors, they're still harmonious. We have movement. There's a lot of movement in here. There's the movement of the actual animals. There's also like this, there's a movement that gives us a sense that we're kind of like falling through a space. And maybe we're going that way. We know from studying the way people's eyes move through looking at pictures that generally, if you're Western, you enter in the bottom left-hand corner of a composition. And that, if we follow that, we're going to come down through here and then ooh, we're going to go that way. And so, is that accurate? I think for a certain level, that might be an accurate way to say people enter compositions. But then there's the idea of like, well, not every culture enters compositions from the same place because not every culture reads left to right. And so thinking about that is important as well. Economy is a great word here. I'm just going to highlight this word. Economy in art means how little or how much of something you use. And so if you use too little of something, um, or too much of something, then your balance will be thrown off. And if your balance is thrown off, then you're going to lose harmony. And if your balance is thrown off, perhaps the thing that you don't want to become dominant becomes dominant. Okay. And so economy is really important because it's all about how much or how little we use of something to achieve our end goal. And so we always want to find or try to find the right balance. These are some of the different types of things that we end up using to create organizing in space: rhythm, repetition, closure and grouping, overlapping, transparency, contrast, symmetry, asymmetry, and the golden section. We're going to talk about the golden section a different time, but basically that's just like the idea of a perfect proportion. Closure and grouping is really important in drawing. So like when we're thinking about this animal here, we can see the shape of this animal, And we don't really need to know what all is over here in this animal in order to get in order to recognize that there is an animal there. Okay. So closure and grouping is basically, and especially if you've taken design with me, you know this, is basically your brain's ability to finish something that isn't whole. So like if I draw like this, most people will finish the circle and say it's a circle, right? And so like if we are looking at something and we're trying to draw something, one of the things students are often doing in the beginning is they're using the same line weight to draw everything. And this actually is a reliance on the idea that line is the only way that the brain can read a visual cue. But in reality, if we give broken information to the brain, the brain can still read this as the same exact thing. And it is a better use of economy. And it's also more lifelike. And also, it isn't a symbol. Okay, so remember this quarter, we're really working to make sure that we are disrupting symbolic drawing. Unless I tell you to draw symbolically, we really want to make sure that we're not doing this quarter. Okay. And so there's a difference between this, which is a symbol. This is still kind of symbolic, but it's more actual. Okay. This one uses closing and grouping. There's areas that are not finished that your brain's putting together. This does not. And so this is more complex. And so I would say that the line that I drew has more diversification. And so when we start with contour this quarter, I'm going to say to you, like, one of the things your drawing needs is more diversification. And you'll say to me, well, it's contour and everything is drawn with the same line weight. And I'll say, no, that's not true. You can twist your pencil and create a different line weight while you're drawing. You can pick your pencil up. You can do these different things to diversify the line weight. And the diversification of the line weight is part of economy and balance, and really interestingly and importantly, variety. Okay. Ooh, I think that was the right button. So Cecily Brown. Okay, line is a tool that we're all pretty familiar with in a very sort of direct way. So line is the path of a moving point that is made by an instrument as it moves across some type of space. It contrasts with its surroundings in some way. It has a measure, it has a type, it has a direction, it has a location, it has a character. Okay. So there is this idea of understanding the difference between conceptual elements. I'm going to use the typing tool because that's going to be probably easier. Conceptual elements. Okay. So conceptual elements are one thing, and then visual elements are a separate thing. And conceptual elements, those are going to be things like the concept of a point, a line, and a plane. Okay. So our conceptual elements then are points, lines, and planes. These are concepts. They are concepts in this sense that they aren't visible till we make them visible. Okay. So a point is a location. To make a line, you simply have a point and it starts moving in a direction and it leaves like a little trail. And so a point is a location, a line is a boundary, usually. It is a boundary because it differentiates space from other space around it. And then the plane is a side, something that is the side of a volume. The planes are made from lines in terms of their boundaries, and the lines are made from points. Now, these are visual elements, conceptual elements. They become visual elements when we draw them. So the visual element of a point is typically a dot. The visual element of a line is typically a line. I'm going to have to move here. And the visual element of a plane is the line moving against its intrinsic direction. So the line is actually moving left to right, say, or right to left. So in order to move against its intrinsic direction, it has to go downwards, where then there's another line. And so now we have a plane. And then the plane forms a side of a dimensional form. So line itself has to be made visible by some type of character. And the character is going to be made by the media. So whether that's like an etching needle, or it's a grease pencil, or it's an artist walking through grass. You know, if an artist walks through grass, then they are able to create a line because a line is simply just the difference between one surface to another. It's visible because there's a change. The location of a line can affect its dominance and its reading. A direction of a line does not have to coincide with the type of line. So we could have a curved line and its direction could be curving left to right, or it could be curving right to left, or it could be curving top to bottom. Okay. And then the measure is like the length and the width. So here we have a painting by the artist Bridget Riley, and it's made from stripes. And the stripes look like most people would define these as lines. Okay. They are, in fact, actually just like every line. Even this little line here that I'm drawing on the screen, that line still has length and width. So if you zoom in enough on that line, it's going to break it down into pixels, and those pixels are going to be taking up, if it's a 1 point, it's going to take up 1 row of pixels or whatever, because it still has a shape that is taking up space. Line itself is not real. It's a concept. What makes the line visible is perhaps real, but line itself is an idea. And that's really important to remember when we're drawing because we always go to line first and it's not always the answer. Okay. Yay. Line can be abstract. It can be representational. It can be textural. It can be color, all kinds of things. So this is by Helen Frankenthaler. Lots of different types of lines in this abstract painting. This painting is abstract, not non-representational, because she actually even tells us what it is. It's a circus landscape, so that means it's abstraction. It's not non-objective or non-representational. Okay. If it was non-objective or non-representational, it usually would have a title like Untitled Number 4 or Composition 3 or Red Number 2, for instance. But she's telling us what these things are. They're parts of a circus. And so we know it's abstraction. So just take a second here and think about the types of lines that you see. There's a difference here created by material, that difference versus like this material difference. There's the location of this line and how that line is pushing us up and thrusting us away this way. And then there's like this line here that's kind of like a circle. It's a closure moment where the circle is broken. So how are the lines being distributed across this space? And what kind of lines do you see? Okay, this is a piece by Ellen Priest. It's called Jazz, Miles, after Miles Davis. Someday My Prince, number 8. So Miles Davis is a jazz trumpeter and a jazz musician. And one of his works is called Someday My Prince Will Come. And so this is a work that's named after one of his works. If you don't know Miles Davis, you probably should look up Miles Davis, I think, because he changed the course of history. So shape is described as an area that stands out from the space next to it because of some type of difference. It could be value, it could be color, it could be texture. Okay. So like when we look at this, what is this shape here? How are we seeing that shape? Why do we see that shape, right? We see that shape because that shape is different from this shape. And this shape is different from that shape. And so all these shapes are different, and that's why we're able to see them. So when we're thinking about shape, we're thinking about something that has a defined or implied boundary. And we see that boundary because of differences. So not all shapes have to be created with line or exhibit continuous edges. Okay, so there again, we're going to think about Gestalt principles like closure and grouping. Shapes can be subjective or objective. They are geometric, organic, and biomorphic. Shapes give artists a means to represent forms seen or imagined. They can also give certain visual qualities or context to a work of art. So in class, you may have noticed that, for instance, that I have a pink triangle tattooed on my wrist. And the pink triangle is literally just a shape, right? It's simply just a shape. Let me see if I can find a triangle here. What's that? Spotlight. That doesn't look like a triangle. Let's just draw a triangle. Oh, here we go. There is no triangle. Darn you. But there's a straight line, so we'll use that. So I have a pink triangle on my wrist. It's tattooed. It looks like this, right? So, and then it's filled in. So the pink triangle on my wrist is just a shape for many people. It's just a shape. However, to me, it's not just a shape. Okay, it has a context and it has a content. Okay, so the pink triangle is a representation of my community. So I am trans, I'm a lesbian, and I have this pink triangle because it's part of our history. And so that history is links back to the Holocaust and when gay men in particular and other people that were seen as social deviants that were considered deviants from their sexuality were given a pink triangle as their symbol in the concentration camps. And there is conversation as more and more research is done and more things come to light that perhaps lesbians were given a black triangle because they were considered more of a social deviant than like a sexual deviant, which is how the Nazis categorized gay people, gay men, and trans people. And you know, when I see this shape, I think of that history. Someone else might think of just a pink triangle, but for me, it's something really important. And so shapes, different types of shapes, have different types of meanings. So when the concentration camps were uh, when the people from the concentration camps were released by the Americans actually kept the people with pink triangles in the camps, and they were transferred to prisons. And it wasn't until 1968 that many of those people were released from prison because homosexuality continued to be a crime in Germany after World War II. So when I see this, it's a very meaningful thing to me. And so you may actually hear all I just said, and you may look at this and actually think that what I'm talking about is like lunar, like just it doesn't make any sense to you. Like why would I then get that tattooed on me, and what would be the purpose of that, right? Oh, I'm just looking for, sympathy. But I use this as a teaching tool. Like I just taught you all about this, and the reason it's on my wrist is because people ask me about it and I teach them. So a shape, in this case, this shape has a context, okay? And it has content. And it is more than just a shape, it's also a symbol, okay? I'll show you another symbol. I find this one really interesting that's built from shapes. In Florida, if you are disabled or handicapped, depending on which word you prefer, and are also sometimes different things, you will get a car, sticker that, whatever. I'm not doing a very good job here, but it looks like this. Okay. And this is usually blue, white figure on a blue background. Okay. Now, in the Pacific Northwest, one of the things I noticed really quickly when I came here and I was looking at different symbols and things like that, what we actually have is we have a person in a wheelchair and they're actually like this. And I think their arm is going here. That is a huge difference. And this is red, a white symbol on a red background. And those two things, that's a huge difference. And what you have to understand is that this, because in art, vertical and horizontal lines symbolize rest, this symbolizes immobility. But this, and I'm going to do a bit of a better job here, just touching this up. This, and I've seen different variations of this symbol. This symbolizes action because the person is actually diagonal, and diagonals are action. So even though the actual shapes are, the same shapes are being used, what they symbolize is really different. And it actually symbolizes a cultural understanding of what being disabled means. But they all only have circles for heads. They all only have rectangles for bodies. They're both white on a different background. Do you see? So again, we're looking and we're thinking about shape, but we're thinking about it through how we react to shapes. So shapes can give content to a work of art. I had a student who studied with me for a long time, and she actually just lives a block away from me, and I see her all the time. And she did this project in printmaking where they had to carve a linoleum block and then they had to print it over and over again to create a continuous pattern. And without her realizing it, when she carved this block, when she printed it by itself, it was a really beautiful carving. But when she printed it over and over again, the negative spaces in the carving started to become a symbol that we equate with hate. And she cried. And I was like, no one is going to think you did this on purpose. And she just looked at me and she just said, I'm doing it all again. And you're talking about a project so far that she had 20 hours in, and she did the whole project again because she didn't want anyone to see that symbol, which I deeply, deeply respected. And so shapes, right? They can be seen, they can be imagined, but they give content. And some of the most powerful shapes in our cultures are geometric. So how we see shapes is really different based on our culture. Shapes can be symbols, like what I just said in the design, or they can exist in space. Space creates dimensionality. So here we see this piece by Georgia O'Keeffe. Space is depicted through the utilization of planes. Now, if you remember earlier, I said that a plane was a conceptual element until it was made visible by drawing boundaries with lines. So we're going to make these concepts visible again so you remember. So you have a point moves through space, it becomes a line. And then the line moving against its intrinsic direction becomes a plane because it creates a boundary of something that has form. Okay. Form is only visible with space, so there's a difference between a shape and a form. So we describe shapes in space through planes, which are visual tools used by artists to break down larger shapes into more easily recognized units. They do not have to be geometric. Okay. They don't have to be geometric. They often are, but they don't have to be. So here, when we look at this piece by Georgia O'Keeffe, we can see that like this is a plane that's being described. This is a plane that's being described. But also value exists in planes. So this light plane versus this mid-tone plane, that is part of the dimensionality that is seen because it is telling us how this is existing in space because it's helping us to understand the light logic. Light logic is the logic of light. And we're going to learn about that. So each one of these shapes that's created with these boundaries of line, those are all planes, but then also then the planes of light and dark are also planes too. Shapes can be employed to create dominance and rhythm in a work of art, as well as harmony and variety. Value is a very, very important part of art in terms of drawing. Value is the relative lightness or darkness of something. Uh, Without value, everything is going to be very, very flat. And nothing is going to have dimensionality. So here we see this lovely drawing by Lisa Yuskavage. It's piggyback. It's actually an etching with watercolor. So if you take printmaking with me, I'll teach you how to make etchings with watercolor. We do etchings with watercolor in my printmaking class. Etching is basically a drawing made through, you have a piece of copper, you cover it with an acid-resistant varnish, you draw through the varnish, and where you draw through the varnish, like everything that you see here that is the drawing, in terms of the line work, was drawn through the varnish with a needle. And then you place the copper plate in acid and it eats where you remove the varnish. And then you remove the acid and you remove the varnish, and then you wipe ink into the plate and print it with a press. And so then the lines transfer onto the paper. And then watercolor is then applied on top. Watercolor, many people consider watercolor to be drawing because of its translucency and its relationship to drawing. But some people believe watercolor is painting because it deals with color. It just depends on your point of view. Yuskavage is a contemporary artist. She is still making absolutely amazing work. I highly suggest you look her up. So value is the relative degree of lightness or darkness. It's one of the basic components of color, and it's talking about the quantity of light reflected by a color. So your three basic components of color are hue. Let me make this black against that gray over there. Hue, value, and chroma. Those are your three basic components of every color. This translates, those of you that do digital art, you may know this as hue, saturation, sorry, spelling, saturation and light. They're the same thing. Saturation is chroma, hue basically means the name of a color, and light basically means its value. And so depending on how you mix these three things together, you create a color. And again, they're the same thing, just different language. So if we look at this color, and we look at this color, and we look at this color, the hue, most of us would say that the hue here is green. Technically, that's not right, but most of us would say that, okay? It's green that's changed through the distribution of value. So which one is lighter? This one is lighter, right? And this one is darker. So this one has more dark value. This one has more light value. So we could say that this one, say this is the mother color. I usually call this like a mother color. So we could say that's the hue, it's green. And then I've changed it by adding light, and I've changed it by adding darkness. And so the change of this hue occurs due to value, which is also saturation. Excuse me, changes because of value, which is also light. I should have put these in the right order. I'm sorry here. And this changes its chroma or its saturation. So this color here is less saturated than this color, and this color here is less saturated than this color. And a big reason for that is the value. Beautiful piece. So here we have a value scale. So a value scale is typically some type of incremental scale of value from, if it's achromatic, meaning it has no color, then it's white to black. If it's chromatic, then it has a color, and it's going to be the lightest version of that color to the darkest version of that color. when they first started making color wheels and they started first making like thinking about color as something which could be recognized, they often did that through, in the beginning, thinking about color, a single color in the sense of a piano scale. And so then in the center, the most neutral would be zero, say. And then this color, say it's red or whatever, would be like F sharp. And it would change, the color would change as it moved from the full, what we would call today the full chroma. It would change as it moved towards zero, which was white. And so it would change in pitch and tone. And you would have scales. And so low key is middle to black. So like this, that way would be low key. High key is middle to white. Okay. And so these terms, right? Think about the term key. Like what key is the symphony in? Oh, it's in D minor. So the key, right, is being employed here because of its old school relationship to music, which created scales. In terms of understanding light logic, the way we create the illusion of volume is through the distribution of value. So when we distribute value, so we have value, and we want to distribute the value, it's going to create the illusion of volume through how it's distributed. We know that if we shine a light here, it's going to create a highlight, which is the brightest part. And then it's going to make light around it, which we call light. And then it's going to move into the shadow. This is often also called midtone. So this stuff in here is often called midtone. That's important because we use that a lot. Um, and it's just depending, like sorry, the book that I pulled this illustration from just had a different language. But we often call the stuff between the light and the dark the midtone. And so then the darkest part of the shadow is the core of the shadow. And then in something that's spherical like this, or something that's not spherical, we're going to get light that bounces from here, and it's going to bounce back up here, and it's going to create reflected light. And then it's going to create a cast shadow. One of the most important things I want you to think about is that shadows are not black. Okay? Shadows are not black. Prior to Impressionism, we kind of thought a lot about the idea that shadows were just black. But the Impressionists came along and they said, actually, shadows are full of blue and purple and green. And everyone laughed at them. But today we actually have tools that read color, like a light meter, and it reads RGB, red, green, and blue, which are the basic primary sort of colors that exist in light. And we know that shadows are not black. Not too long ago, my niece sent me a picture from where they live in Maryland, and it was snowing. And I said, look how blue the snow is. Can you believe that people used to think that snow was white and black? Look how blue those shadows are. Do you think that's black? And she's 11, and she came back and she said, no, that's definitely not black. I'm really proud of her. Uh, she just went to a museum in Washington, D.C. where I took her and her sister to see an exhibition that was in this museum in DC. And she just went there on a field trip. And She was so excited. What's really funny is when I took her to see my art, she was so not excited. But when she went on field trip there, and where my art's no longer there, she was really excited. Um, but she took pictures of all her favorite art and she sent them all to me, and I was really impressed. I told her she was developing a really good sense of what type of art she liked, and I said these are some of my favorite art pieces there too. So, I talked with her when she sent me this picture of the snow, and about this idea that shadows are not black. Now, when we're using charcoal, often we draw them in as black first, but then we can lift light out of that charcoal darkness. And so you can see here that the shadow is not all just one value, it's different values. It gets darker and darker as it gets closer and closer and becomes what we call a closed shadow, but out here it's an open shadow. So shadows can be used in so many ways. Like, sorry, shadows value. So value is descriptive. So it tells us how light is affecting an object. It's expressive. Okay, so it can create chiaroscuro or tenebrism. Chiaroscuro is usually what we think of like Rembrandt, where things have a high key light and a high key darkness, but maybe there's still quite a bit of intermediate values. Tenebrism is actually a much more contrasty form of chiaroscuro. So in tenebrism, you have basically like a really high key white and a really low key dark. So like if this drawing was just this area here, it would probably be more of a tenebrism because it's much more of just like a high key light and a high key dark. But if this drawing was like here, we would say it's perhaps more chiaroscuro because there's more midtones. Uh, chiaroscuro is very expressive. Here we're thinking about a lot of like Baroque art is very chiaroscuro-esque. Value can also be decorative, and so when you use value decoratively, it does not have to represent light. It can be much more fluent in how it works. So values can be closed or open. So like if I'm in an airplane, this is going to be my airplane, or my banana taped to a wall. Or make it a now if I put a prop on it, maybe it'll look more like an airplane. There you go. There's my airplane. Yay. Um, so there's my airplane. So my airplane is way up in the air, and way down here, there's a mountain. Okay. Now the light is above the airplane, and it's going to shoot down its shadow. But there's a long way between this airplane and that mountain, and so the shadow just gets dispersed so much that in the end, it's just very, very open. And you may be, if it's really cloudy, you may not even know that there's an airplane up in the sky. Okay. But you can kind of sense that something just went overhead because the land that you're standing on went just a little bit darker and it got lighter again. Okay. So that would be an open shadow. But if I have my airplane and it's about to touch down on the ground and it's really close to the runway, this is one of my favorite parts of flying. Takeoff and landing are two of my favorite parts. I just like it. I think it's fun. I actually like flying a lot, like the actual sensation of flying I like. I like taking off. I like landing. I just don't like people. That's why I don't like flying. And so as it gets closer to the ground, the shadow gets really, really close and starts to look just like the airplane. So it becomes a closed shadow. And so the closer the airplane is to the ground, the shadow represents the airplane more and more until actually the wheels touch down. And like the shadow becomes so close to the airplane, like where the wheels are touching, there's just like a line. So there's a lot of reasons why we might use an open value and a lot of reasons why we may use a closed value. So texture, right? This can be the surface characteristic of a material. So like if you want to do a really, really refined portrait in watercolor, you wouldn't really use a very cold pressed paper because cold pressed paper has a lot of texture. And so that texture can interact with the actual uh, portrait. So you'd probably want to use a really hot pressed piece of paper that is very, very smooth so that the texture of the paper doesn't interact with the portrait. Okay. So paper has surface characteristics that you can actually touch. Texture is produced by natural forces, such as the artist's manipulation or the production of the thing, like the production of the paper. There are four basic types of texture. There's actual, which is like the physical actual texture. A simulated texture, like if I make a painting, but it's a painting of a horse and I simulate the horse's hair. It could be abstract. So like again, I paint a horse, but I paint the horse like green and I put spikes or something, I don't know, on the horse. And it could be invented, meaning that I could tell you until 2010 or whatever that dinosaurs had scales and this is what they looked like because I've seen a lizard, right? That was an invented texture based on a lizard, but it wasn't the actual texture of a dinosaur, which we know had more feathers than scales, or some dinosaurs did. So these are four basic types of texture. Oops, I need to erase those. So here's actual texture, so the real thing. And then we have other types of textures. We have simulated texture, which is something that looks real, but it's not. Okay. We have abstract, and we have invented. So when we look here at this piece by Louis Malou Jones, who was a wonderful Harlem Renaissance Black designer and artist, we have perhaps this is a fern back there. So it's like a simulated, abstracted. Sorry, it's not simulated. It's an abstract texture versus something like perhaps these masks, which feel a bit more invented. But then there also may be like this idea that this texture here should be like wood texture. And so that's simulated. Okay, almost done, everybody. So space is basically the measurable distance, the intervals between points or images. So if I have a point and I make it visual, so it's a concept, it means location. So I make it visible by making a point. That is a dot. And then I have another conceptual location, which I make visible with a dot. Now I have 2 points that are visible. Space is the distance between them. Okay. So space is created by the art elements, which is all the design elements. Its form, its importance lies in its functions, whether you're actually employing space or you're disregarding space. Okay. So there's positive space and then there's negative space. Okay. So positive space, positive space, and then we have negative space. Okay. So positive space is like some type of actual thing. Okay, so if I make a star, that's a tiny star. We don't want that tiny star again. Let's pick something else. I'm going to use a diamond, a filled diamond. Okay, so we have a diamond. Okay, and the diamond exists within a rectangle. Okay, So now the diamond is positive and the space around the diamond is negative. Okay. So we say here that the diamond is the positive form or is taking up the positive space and the space around the diamond is negative. So let's draw an arrow that's blue to the negative space. So maybe let's change that arrow color. So negative space is going to be pink. So this is all the negative space. Okay. And then the blue is the positive space. Okay. So that's a pretty easy way to think about positive and negative space. Now, you don't have to fill in the thing to make it look like the positive. It doesn't have to be filled in. So for instance, like I can um I can take a rectangle. Let me fill it. Actually, let's do this. I'm going to fill the rectangle. Boom. Okay. And then I can take an eraser. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, I have to use this one. Ooh, will the vanishing pen work? Ooh. Okay. Sorry. Now I'm just having fun. Let me go back to this. Sorry. I'm easily amused as an artist. I'm like, ooh, look at that. So we have this space that's been filled in. And then imagine that this is charcoal and I can take my eraser and I can actually then remove. I can remove the chair by not drawing the chair. I can erase the chair. Another way to do this would be to draw the outside boundaries, the contours of the chair, and then fill in the negative space around it, but never actually draw the chair. Even though I've not drawn the chair, most people would say I've drawn the chair, even though it's not actually there as a positive form. So then the question that you have then is, well, wait, which one is positive and which one is negative? So then you have to decide. The chair, which is the subject, will be the positive, and the space around it is still negative, even though we didn't draw the chair. However, as we start to group things into composite shapes, so here we have this wonderful etching by Paula Rego, and we have Old King Cole. And so I'm going to draw around Old King Cole here. Boop, 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 boop. And again, this is an etching. Okay, and I'm going to draw around Old King Cole. But I'm also going to incorporate the bed or this bench. And so now this whole area, all of this now, I can say all of this composite shape, composite being meaning two shapes brought together to make one, it's all positive. And all of this is negative. Okay. I could even then also say, well, actually, I'm also going to pull in one of his daughters. Or all of the daughters. I think they're his daughters. I can't remember the nursery rhyme totally. And so now all of this is positive space. And all that other stuff is negative space. Now, what's really cool about understanding space is it's one of the things that can really help you to understand how to draw. Because if we look at this composition, I can actually draw a line from the top of her head to the top of his head and find an angle. And then I can say, okay, so there's an angle. And then if I follow along here, that creates a contour of this person's back. And then the contour of his back and his hair. So that now has um, created a boundary, and that boundary in here now is a measurable distance, and that measurable distance now, that measurable negative space, can only look like that one negative space. And so if I was drawing this, if I got this negative space correctly in my drawing, because I got the contours of the figures correct, and I got this angle here up there at the top, if I got that angle correct, it would create a negative space of a certain size with certain attributes. And that would tell me that if I have this correct, then I have the relationship between this figure here and this figure here correct. If I create this negative space by creating this angle and following their contours, and it does not look like this, then I've got it wrong. And so then my figures are wrong because the negative space is wrong. So negative space is helpful in terms of understanding dimensionality, but it's also helpful in helping us to draw to see when things are interrelated together correctly. And I'm going to teach you how to do that so that you can employ negative space in order to understand how to draw. Okay. Different types of spatial indicators, size, position, okay, overlapping, like transparency. Overlapping helps us to understand which form is in front of which form. So like if I have, if I have a bottle, why? Oh, because it's not a color. If I have a bottle, that's not the right one. Sorry. Okay, here we go. So I have a bottle. Okay. Now, it's an opaque bottle. What kind of bottle is it? Well, depending on what we place next to it, say we place a gloss next to it. Okay, so now it's perhaps if they're on the same exact plane, now we have like a ginger beer and we have a glass. And so the size of the bottle in relationship to this helps us understand what kind of bottle it is. Now, perhaps we have like, a little tiny shot glass, then now we can say, well, maybe this is a bottle of whiskey. So the size is determined by what's around it. The position, right? Like if I have this, and that's my rectangle of my picture plane, and I put, the table back here, and then back here I'm just gonna put a McDonald's sign. I don't know why. It's a McDonald's sign. I don't know what McDonald's signs look like. I guess they kind of look like that. Then now we can say that the bottle is in the front of the space. And the McDonald's sign, I don't know if that is a McDonald's sign. We're just going to call it a McDonald's sign, is in the back, right? Now, one of the things that helps us understand the space is overlapping. So let's draw the back of the table again, and then here I'm going to put the edge of a bowl, and then that's the rest of the table. Now, through overlapping, we know that the bottle's in front of the bowl. But whoa, what if the bottle is transparent? If the bottle is transparent, say, and there's no refraction, which there would be, but say there isn't, then we wouldn't know what's in front of what, okay? Because things are transparent. But because of refraction, we generally do kind of get a sense of what's the front thing. And the refraction is kind of like it's a form of interpenetration. So refraction being the distortion that occurs as like light moves through this and it curves and it bends, right? Because the bottle has a curvature. And then that distorts the image on the back, which is then being seen through the front. And so we get like refraction of light. That's a form of interpenetration, meaning that this is being affected by that interpenetration. If the bottle was green and the bowl was yellow, that's not going to work. Let me be easier on myself. If the bottle is magenta and the bowl is yellow, where they overlap would be red. Okay, because magenta plus yellow makes red. That is why red is not a primary color in color. Okay. And light red is a primary color, but in like painting or printing or something like that, red is not a primary color because what you were taught is fake. And I'll probably tell you that a bunch of times throughout the quarter. Red is not a primary color because you can mix red from magenta and yellow, and that makes red. So if a primary color is a color that cannot be mixed, then red can be mixed, so it's not a primary color. So your elementary school teacher was lying to you. Okay. Fractal representation is like when things are in different types of spatial considerations. So like in Egyptian art, you might have a head facing one way, a body facing forward, and then legs facing sideways. So this is fractal representational. Sharpening and diminishing detail is just like as things get closer to us, they get more clear. As they get further away, they get less clear. And then convergent parallels is literally 1 point perspective. So in 1 point perspective, we have everything is going to some type of vanishing point. Could be 1 point perspective, 2 point perspective, 3 point perspective. That's all converging parallels. That deals with linear perspective, which we will study 1 point perspective in class. Okay, but we're also going to study 2 point, 3 point perspective just through drawing. So as these things get further away, they get smaller because things diminish in detail as they get further away. Converging parallels just means linear perspective. Okay, so there's a little tiny quiz that you need to take that is in conjunction to this lecture and this PowerPoint. I hope you learned some stuff. I always am throwing out a lot of information out there. Like, will I quiz you on the meaning of a pink triangle? No, I will not. Will I quiz you on who Diego Rivera's husband is? No, I will not. It's just context, right? And it's important context because it helps us to understand the world around us. And so I teach a lot through contextualizing because art does not exist in a vacuum. So those of you today that make digital art wouldn't be making digital art in 1980, probably. You would have to be in a very specialized situation to have access to be making digital art. Um, you'd have to, I mean, maybe 1980. Well, yeah, I mean, like in 1980, we would make art kind of with our keyboards. Uh, but like in terms of like, the like image drawing, it took a lot of computing power to do that, and most people did not have access to that, right? And so uh, the context being that the invention of technology that is more accessible, the invention of nanotechnology creates the context in which you can understand the production of making digital art. And so that's why I give a lot of contextual information. So you need to take the little quiz. I hope that you learned something, and this is stuff that's going to come up a lot in class, but I'm not going to like redo this lecture in class. You're just going to start hearing these terms in class, and that's how we're going to be utilizing this information. Okay, thank you so much for your attention, and I hope that, yeah, that was somewhat entertaining. I hope so. Okay, thanks everybody.